Respirators and surgical masks are two types of personal protective equipment, or PPE, that are used to protect workers in healthcare settings. A surgical mask is not a respirator, and that's an important distinction for you and your employer to understand. So let's review the significant differences between a respirator and a surgical mask. What is a respirator? A respirator is a type of personal protective equipment designed to reduce your exposure to airborne contaminants. Respirators are available in different types and sizes, and the respirator you use must be individually selected to fit your face and to provide a tight seal. A proper seal between your face and the respirator forces inhaled air to be pulled through the respirator's filter material and not through gaps between your face and the respirator. If your supervisor requires you to use a respirator, it must be Niosh certified and must be used in the context of a comprehensive respiratory protection program according to OSHA's Respiratory Protection Standard 29 CFR 1910.134, which includes but is not limited to medical evaluation, fit testing, and training elements. Respirators are used routinely to protect healthcare workers against airborne infectious diseases, such as tuberculosis, anthrax, SARS, and hantavirus, because they protect against both large and small particles. What is a face mask? A face mask is a loose-fitting, disposable mask that covers your nose and mouth. Surgical masks, dental masks, medical procedure masks, isolation masks, and laser masks are all types of face masks. Face masks help stop large droplets from being spread by the person wearing them, whether that person is a patient or a healthcare worker. Face masks also keep splashes or sprays from reaching the mouth and nose of the person wearing them. However, face masks are not designed or certified to seal tightly against your face or to prevent the inhalation of small airborne contaminants. During inhalation, small airborne contaminants pass through gaps between the face and the face mask and the material of the mask. Remember, face masks are not considered respirators and they do not provide respiratory protection. Only face masks that are cleared by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA for short, may be legally marketed in the United States. The FDA approval signifies that they have been tested for their ability to resist splashes of blood and other body fluids. To offer protection, both face masks and respirators need to be worn correctly and consistently throughout the time they are being used. When used properly, face masks and respirators both play an important role in preventing exposures to different types of hazards. If you need the protection of both a face mask and a respirator, you can use a surgical N95 respirator. Surgical N95 respirators offer protection from both airborne and body fluid contaminants and are approved by both Niosh and the FDA. During an infectious disease outbreak, such as SARS or pandemic flu, face masks and respirators should be used in conjunction with other controls and interventions that are known to prevent the spread of infection. These include engineering and administrative controls, such as installing sneeze guards and permitting teleworking, and work practices such as cough etiquette, hand hygiene, and avoiding large gatherings. For additional information on respiratory protection in the workplace, consult this website. Mention or visual display of the name of any company or product in this video does not constitute endorsement by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. This video provides a brief overview and general information regarding respirator use in your workplace. It does not cover all of the
Over 3 million workers in the United States are required to wear respiratory protection within their job functions. The N95
To mission of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, National Personal Protective Technology Laboratory, is to prevent work-related injury, illness, and death by advancing the state of knowledge and application of personal protective. The mission of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, National Personal Protective Technology Laboratory, is to prevent work-related injury, illness, and death by advancing the state of knowledge and application of personal protective technologies. One unique aspect of our mission is our authority to certify respirators to protect the nation's workforce against inhalation hazards. Every day, millions of workers across America rely on respirators for protection on the job. Respirators are used in most industries, including industries such as agriculture, healthcare, mining, and firefighting. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health is part of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and is the federal organization responsible for preventing work-related injury, illness, and death. It's our job at Niosh and PPTL to ensure that all respirators used in the workplace meet rigid quality and performance standards. In fact, all workplace respirators are required to be tested and approved by Niosh before they are used in a workplace. Only then can they carry the Niosh mark. Hundreds of applications for product certifications are submitted to Niosh every year from across the globe. Yet only those that meet the Niosh requirements, about 65% of those submitted, are granted approval. Worldwide, more than 100 approval holders manufacture Niosh-approved respirators for use in the United States internationally. What does it mean to be Niosh-approved? Manufacturers who want to market a respirator for workers in the United States must submit a comprehensive approval package consisting of performance tests, drawings, packaging and label specifications, detailed user instructions, respirator samples, and a quality plan for making the product, as well as a quality assurance manual for the entire manufacturing facility in which it's made. Niosh carefully reviews the data and performs rigorous testing to quality performance and design specifications. If the product does not meet Niosh standards, the product cannot be labeled and marketed as Niosh approved. If the respirator meets Niosh standards, the manufacturer receives a testing and certification number, which appears on the product label along with the Niosh name. Once the product has been tested and certified by Niosh, any future changes to the certification must be submitted to Niosh for approval. Workers, as well as employers, can verify whether they are using genuine Niosh-certified respirators. Simply find the TC number and check it against the list of approved respirators on the Niosh website. But the Niosh certification process does not stop there. Even after they are approved, respirators are monitored to ensure that they continue to meet uncompromising Niosh standards. Niosh and PPTL will investigate any workplace situation involving a Niosh-certified respirator when a problem is found with an approved respirator. Through product audits, reports by customers, test failures, and even reports from approval holders. Respirators are retested. If necessary, manufacturers are asked to make corrections to the product. In some cases, the respirators are recalled from the marketplace. Ensuring that all personal protective respirators meet uncompromising Niosh standards is vital to the health and safety in the workplace, impacting not only American workers, but the ones they love. When it comes to personal protective respirators, know it's Niosh approved and you can breathe easy.
As a key component of its mission, Niosh is dedicated to advancing the state of knowledge and application of personal protective technologies, including air-purifying respirators, which will be referred to as respirators in this video. Various types of these respirators, such as filtering facepiece respirators and elastomeric half-mask respirators, are used to reduce personal exposure to potentially harmful aerosols. The term aerosol includes both solid and liquid airborne particles of varying size, shape, and density that are often invisible to the naked eye. Whether it's a virus or bacteria, concrete dust, or engineered nanoparticle, it's important to understand that the type of particle does not affect its ability to be filtered. A particle is a particle. This means that respirators can be used to protect workers from a wide variety of aerosols. For example, respirators can be used to protect a healthcare worker who might be exposed to tuberculosis or other airborne pathogens. To protect a construction worker from airborne particles generated by sawing concrete, or to protect a laboratory technician who handles engineered nanoparticles. All respirators selected by Respiratory Protection Program administrators must pass Niosh's stringent certification process. Niosh certifies respirators based on how efficiently they filter airborne particles and how resistant they are to oil. For example, the most commonly used respirator is an N95 filtering facepiece respirator, which filters at least 95% of airborne particles and is not resistant to oil. To ensure optimum protection, respirator users should only wear respirators selected by their organization's Respiratory Protection Program administrators as being the most appropriate for their working conditions. As the user breathes and causes air to pass through the filter, the dense network of fibers in a respirator capture particles through a combination of three mechanical methods: impaction, interception, and diffusion. Some respirators contain charged fibers that use a fourth method, electrostatic attraction, to attract nearby particles. Impaction occurs when a particle's inertia prevents it from adjusting as the airflow carrying it into a respirator changes direction when it nears a filter fiber. In this capture method, the particle hits a fiber head-on and becomes stuck. Other particles can become attached when the airstream carries them within one particle radius of a fiber. This is referred to as interception. Diffusion occurs when smaller particles follow a random motion as they are bombarded by air molecules. Those that come into contact with a worker's respirator are captured by its network of fibers. With all of these capture methods, once a particle comes in contact with a filter fiber, it is removed from the airstream and strongly held to the fiber by molecular attractive forces. If the respirator contains electrostatically charged fibers, that charge will cause more particles to be captured. The method of capture is largely influenced by the characteristics of a particle, such as aerodynamic diameter, density, and charge. However, the filter's ability to capture a particle is not affected by whether that particle is a virus, concrete dust, or engineered nanoparticle. Remember, a particle is a particle. Niosh tests respirator filters for their ability to capture particles that might be found in occupational situations. The conditions, such as particle challenge and the flow rate for certification testing of air purifying respirators, are believed to represent near worst-case conditions for all types of workplaces, meaning the test conditions produce maximum filter penetration. This ensures that filters in Niosh-approved respirators will collect hazardous workplace aerosols with very high efficiency. Based on the considerable collective knowledge of the scientific community regarding aerosol filtration, it is not necessary to test a respirator filter with a biological aerosol because certification testing applies a worst-case set of test conditions. Again, because a particle is a particle, when properly selected and used, Niosh-approved respirators should provide the expected levels of protection against all types of workplace aerosols. This video was produced by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health with assistance from RTI International, an independent nonprofit research institute. The focus of this video is how particles are captured. If you have questions about determining what type of respirator is appropriate for your...
So by this point, you're probably aware that your body needs oxygen to survive, right? In fact, every cell in your body needs that precious oxygen. Those cells use the oxygen to produce energy in the form of ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, a super important molecule, sometimes even called the molecular unit of currency. The cells use it to basically pay the molecules inside the cell to do their specific jobs. It's like one big factory with a bunch of workers that all have specific jobs needed to run the factory, and they only take ATP as payment. Now, the mitochondrion of the cell takes in oxygen and makes ATP to pay the workers through a process called oxidative phosphorylation. So the mitochondrion's like the factory's payroll department, right? When the cell doesn't get enough oxygen, and so payroll can't produce the ATP that they need to pay the workers to do their jobs, the whole cellular factory can be damaged or even die, and we call that process hypoxia, where hypo means less than normal, and oxia means oxygenation. When the oxygen comes in, typically it goes straight to payroll, specifically to the inner mitochondrial membrane, where oxidative phosphorylation takes place. Oxygen is used in one of the last steps and serves as an electron acceptor, and this allows the process to finish and produce ATP. So without oxygen, we can't finish oxidative phosphorylation and produce ATP. But why does the whole factory fall apart when payroll stops making ATP? Why don't they just pause for a bit or take a little break? Well, when certain workers stop doing their jobs, things get a little out of hand. One super important worker is the sodium-potassium pump on the cell's membrane. Pretty much like the bouncer that makes sure there isn't too much sodium diffusing into the cell, basically by pumping it back out every time it diffuses in, and maintaining a concentration gradient. This process also keeps too many water molecules from passively diffusing into the cell. Think of it like this. Water molecules want to go every which way and are constantly moving back and forth, inside and outside the cell. But all these sodium ions on this side tend to physically block them from leaving that side. So over time, more water molecules get retained or almost trapped on the side with more sodium. In short, the more sodium molecules, the more water molecules. But our pump doesn't do all this for free, and it needs ATP. So without ATP, it stops pumping sodium back out, and sodium starts to diffuse in. And it keeps diffusing in and the concentration gradient goes away. Now, with less sodium molecules in the outside blocking the water molecules from going into the cell, water follows the sodium in, which causes the cell to swell up. And when the cell swells up, a couple things start to happen. First, usually you have these really tiny microvilli on the cell's membrane, which sort of look like little fingers that help increase the cell's surface area and therefore help the cell absorb more things. When the cell swells up and gets all bloated, the water sort of fills these little fingers and reduces the surface area, which makes it harder to absorb molecules since there's less surface area, right? Also, sort of along the same lines, the cell can bleb, or bulge outward from all this water. And this is a sign that the cell's cytoskeleton, or this structural framework, is beginning to fail, and is letting water slip through. Finally, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, or the rough ER, also swells when the cell swells. And remember that the rough ER has all these little ribosomes on its outside, and these are really important for the cell in making proteins. But when the rough ER swells, they detach and stop making proteins, so protein synthesis goes down. All the ATP isn't immediately lost, though, when you lose oxygen and oxidative phosphorylation stops. Luckily, your cell can make ATP another way, called anaerobic glycolysis. Anaerobic meaning in the absence of oxygen. This is like the backup ATP generator, which isn't nearly as efficient and only produces a net of about 2 ATP molecules per glucose, whereas oxidative phosphorylation makes about 30 to 36. So it helps a little, but what also happens is it produces a byproduct called lactic acid, which lowers the pH inside the cell. This more acidic environment can denature or essentially destroy proteins and enzymes. Now, up to this point, it's not all bad, because one super important thing about these processes that happen to the cell is that they're potentially reversible, meaning that if we all of a sudden get oxygen again and start making ATP, then these changes aren't necessarily permanent. After enough time, though, irreversible damage can happen to the cell. Kind of like the sodium-potassium pump, there's also a calcium pump that helps keep too much calcium from getting in. And if that stops working, then calcium starts to build up, which is not a great thing. First, calcium can activate certain enzymes that you might not necessarily want to activate, like proteases that can slice up proteins and damage the cell's cytoskeleton, which remember is the structural framework that keeps the cell together. Also, endonucleases can be activated, which can cut up DNA, the cell's genetic material. And if we get back to the lactic acid, as more lactic acid builds up and the environment gets more acidic, the lysosomal membrane can be damaged as well, which usually houses these hydrolytic enzymes whose job is basically to grind up large molecules. And when they get out, well, they're also activated by calcium, and then they just start cutting everything in sight, and basically start digesting the cell from the inside. Finally, the phospholipase enzyme, which basically splits phospholipids, gets activated. Since the cell's membrane's made of phospholipids, these can destroy the cell membrane, which is probably the most important sign of irreversible damage. When the membrane's destroyed, these enzymes we just listed, along with others, can leak out into the blood and continue wreaking havoc. Finally, let's jump back to calcium. Enzyme activation isn't the only effect calcium can have. Calcium can actually get into the mitochondria, causing a cascade that leads the mitochondrial membrane to be more permeable to small molecules. And so it lets a molecule that usually stays in the mitochondria, cytochrome C, to leak out into the cytosol. And this is a big red flag to the cell that things have gone south, and is kind of analogous to the self-destruct button, and activates a process called apoptosis, or programmed cell death. And this is a bit like cellular suicide. At this point, the cell's not in good shape, right? And all this happened eventually because of a lack of oxygen, or because of hypoxia.
Amazing facts.